Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it.
What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. You are listening to episode number 5. Can't believe we're already 5 episodes in. I've had a lot of fun doing this. I hope you guys have enjoyed what you've heard so far. Episode 1, we talked about, or rather I talked about, the debut from Led Zeppelin. Episode 2, my friend Roman and I sat down and we talked about Metallica's debut, Kill 'Em All. Episode 3, my mom and I, we chatted about Appetite for Destruction, the debut album from Guns N' Roses. And episode 4, my friend John and I, we talked about Black Sabbath's debut. So if you haven't heard any of those and you want to hear some of those, you can go back and listen in the Anchor app, Spotify, Google Podcasts. The link in the bio for more places, if none of those suit you. Link in bio in my personal account, which is OwenW409 on Instagram. Or you can follow the podcast on Instagram, which is Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, all one word. On Instagram, you can go ahead and follow that and get the latest updates on what's coming up for the podcast, all the news and tidbits and all that jazz. But, yeah, so if you want to go back and listen to those episodes, feel free to do so. Would love the support. So, today, though, pretty much so far, all we've talked about is debut albums. So we're switching it up today, talk about a newer release that came out a few weeks ago at this point. I'm, of course, talking about Foo Fighters' Medicine at Midnight. Now, I don't know how many of you out there are Foo Fighters fans, but I do consider myself a Foo Fighter fan. My mom is a big Foo Fighters fan. She's been seeing them in concert on several occasions, and I wanted to have her on the show today, but our schedules just couldn't work out a time where we could just both have, a block of time where we could just talk about the music, but we will definitely have her back to talk about the Foos at a later point. So before we get into this album specifically, just a little background on the Foo Fighters for those of you who may be unaware, or those of you who are interested. So many of you probably know Nirvana, and for those of you who don't know, Nirvana is not a t-shirt brand. That's a joke. But Nirvana, big-time grunge band, Smells Like Teen Spirit, Nevermind, the album, it's iconic. Most people know it if they are a fan of rock or metal. But the drummer from Nirvana, Dave Grohl, he creates the Foo Fighters. And with the Foo Fighters, he's got Dave Grohl, Nate Mendel, Pat Smear, Taylor Hawkins, Chris Shiflett, and Rami Jaffe. Rami Jaffe being the keyboardist who joined in about 2005, but the rest of those, I believe, are the original members, the OGs, if you will. They got great songs, Everlong, My Hero, good stuff like that. Check them out wherever you get your music from. They're all over the place. But, they got kind of a harder rock sound, not too hard though, nothing like heavy metal or anything like that, and then they got some acoustic twang and they kind of mix into it. I'm a Foo Fighters fan. I like to listen to it. It's good music, I think. It's kind of nice middle-of-the-road rock that I think everybody can kind of enjoy. And personally, Dave Grohl, I think, is a really cool guy, and he's someone I would love to just sit down with and just have a conversation. Who knows? Someday I might be lucky enough to have him on the podcast, which would blow my mind, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Let's get into the album we're talking about today, which, as I mentioned, is Medicine at Midnight. So, Medicine at Midnight. This album was announced that they were going to be recording in October of 2019, and it is their 10th studio album. So it was based off of demos recorded by Dave Grohl, as most of the stuff is, just based off of Dave Grohl, considering he is kind of the engine of the band. Although he did say for this album, he kind of didn't want to get in his own way. He wanted to let the other creative voices that were in the band kind of shine through and kind of add more influence than they had on past records, and he could just kind of be a part of the band more than just like having to bear such a large responsibility. So October 2019, bands announced they're recording the album. November 2019, the band releasing a series of EPs under the umbrella name Foo Files, largely consisting of previously released B-sides and live performances. By February 2020, Grohl announced that the new album was complete. But, as many of you know, unless you've been living under an absolute boulder of a rock, the COVID-19 pandemic hits, and they have to kind of shelve the record to figure out what's going to happen. Other things that the pandemic interrupted was concerts, as many of you know, and I was originally supposed to see the Foo Fighters in in May, matter of fact, May, I believe they were calling it the Van Tour. I was going to see them in Cincinnati with my mom. It was going to be a lot of fun, but the pandemic hit, so obviously that was not able to occur. And then they rescheduled for October, and then I'm not sure. I believe they canceled officially, but the Foo Fighters, Dave, they're a great act. They'll come back around at some point, and I am sure that I will see them. Anywho, so in November 2020, promotion for the album ramped up. Its title and release date were announced. The release date, February 5th. So as I'm recording this on the 22nd of February, that was, 17 days ago, roughly. So a little over 2 weeks, but still fairly new enough that I think we can talk about it, and still it'd be relevant. So 3 singles released from the album: Shame, Shame, No Son of Mine, and Waiting on a War. Trust me, we're going to get into all of those songs rather, not shows, momentarily. And then in January, they performed at the presidential inauguration for Joe Biden. And then February 10th, the Foo Fighters were announced as one of the 2021 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees in their first year of eligibility, as their debut album had been released 25 years prior. So, as I touched on, that's a little bit of background concerning the Medicine at Midnight era of the Foos and the lead up to the album. So, releasing an album in COVID times proved challenging to the Foos, but caused a little delays, but obviously didn't prevent the album from being released or being heard by the general public. So, Foo Fighters, they create kind of rock with some acoustic vibes, but this album, they wanted to do something different. They wanted to make kind of a party album. David touched on, I believe it was David Bowie's Let's Dance, and that was an inspiration for him with this album. I believe he had talked to the drummer, and I think the drummer from David Bowie's Let's Dance even played on this record. I've heard different things in different interviews, but the party vibe and just kind of a fun record, and something different. They wanted to do something different. Dave specifically wanted to do something different. And I think that shines through on certain tracks, but I still think that the root of the Foo Fighters, it's still a rock album. It's not like disco or anything totally off-brand like that. So, let's get into it track by track. Let's break it down. Here we go. So, track 1, we start off with Making a Fire. Now, I'm probably going to list my favorite tracks towards the end, but this is definitely one of them. Making a Fire. I love how the drums sound at the beginning. I don't know who is playing that or who, designed it that way, because, you've got 2 really talented drummers in this band. You've got Dave Grohl with his drumming background from Nirvana and just that's his roots as a drummer. And you've got Taylor Hawkins, who is no slouch when it comes to his drumming ability. And I just love how it just sounds. It's nothing complicated or nothing crazy, but it's just like, I don't know. The term groove, I'm probably going to throw around a lot this episode, because it's all about the groove and the feel and just, I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's his hi-hat and just like, I don't know. I don't want to get too technical with the drums, because then my friends who are drummers will hear this and they'll be like, you're a moron, you don't know what you're talking about. So I'll just keep it at, I love the way it sounds. And then the guitar tone comes in, and it's just like, it's a rock guitar tone. Like there's not much else to say about it. And then it kind of builds. So we start with just the drums, and then the guitar adds. And then it's like the whole band comes together, and it creates this really just nice, like, You turn it on, it's track 1, new album, you're intrigued, you want to hear it, and you're like, yeah, I like this. This is going to be a good record. And that's what was going through my head when I first turned on Medicine at Midnight. And then they got some female vocalists in there hitting the na 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 na. I'm like, oh, hey now. This is a groovy, fun song. And I think Dave, throughout this record, he sounds great. He shows a lot of vocal like chops. His voice, I think he's really underrated as a vocalist. And I think here he really kind of does a lot of things like with his voice. He doesn't just sing one style. He kind of sings like softer on some songs, and then like he's more in your face on other songs. Not like in your face to like the point of screaming, but like, I don't know. It's a strong vocal presence on other songs nonetheless. So I think it's one of the more rock tracks. I would say Making a Fire is. There are some that are kind of like funky, kind of like interesting, but Making a Fire, there's a live performance of them doing that. I believe it's on their Instagram page, and I think on their YouTube channel maybe. I have fun listening to it. I have fun listening to this song. The album really isn't that long. I believe it's like 33, 42 minutes, something like that. So it's in that range. So it's a little over half an hour, but it's really, starting off, it's a great way to kick off the album. We move to track 2, Shame, Shame. Now this, for me, was the first song that I heard from the album. As I mentioned, November, they released 3 singles. Well, they didn't release them all at once. It was, I believe, No Son of Mine, Shame, Shame, and Waiting on a War. So Shame, Shame was the first of those. And let me tell you, this is an interesting song. When I first heard it, I didn't know what to think. I wasn't a huge fan, but it kind of grows on you. I was listening to it earlier today, and I guess the way I thought of it was kind of like being stuck in a hamster ball, if that makes any sense. Like, it's just kind of, it gets in like this pattern, this just flow, and you're just kind of in that flow the entire song. There's no like shift from like verse to chorus. Well, I take that back. There is, but it still has that big groove in the background. And, I like the way that the track sounds. There's like these, I don't know if it's like a backing track they used, a click track, because they did say that they used some click tracks on it and they kept that in the final mix, or if it's rim shots that Taylor's playing. But it really is just like, it's fun to just like sort of beatbox along to in my car and then just kind of like sway from side to side just while listening to this. And then this is the track where Dave's vocal performance is kind of lighter. And, it's really when the track builds, starts off, with this interesting little drum beat they got going on. And then Dave's singing like kind of softly. And then eventually, while, he's singing his lyrics, this, that, and the other. And it kind of builds. And then by the time we get to the chorus, it all kind of comes together. And then it kind of fades away back to that original pattern. So that's the contrast between like the verse and the chorus. Because in the chorus, it's like kind of louder, like in your face. But then it kind of shifts back down with a little, boom, but you all don't want to hear me sing it. Go listen to it for yourselves to hear how it really sounds. And then I like something they do here. Dave singing like, shame, boom, 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 shame, doom, doom, shame. And then in the second half of the song, they add these little guitar stings like, wow, boom, 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 wow, boom, boom, wow, boom, 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 boom. I think the bass line on this track is what really carries it through. I think that's how it is in a lot of tracks. The bass doesn't get recognition, but it's like there, chunking right along, keeping things. It's what you're listening to. It's what you hear, but you don't realize it. And I think I just had that realization. But Shame, Shame, probably one of my favorite tracks too. It adds a different sound, a different flair, but it still is the Foo Fighters. It's still Dave Grohl singing. And I mean, who doesn't love that? So we move now to track number 3, entitled Cloud Spotter. Now, an interesting note about Cloud Spotter, I didn't really like this song at first. This was the one I was like, skip. Like, I'm not going to heart this one on Spotify. I'm not going to do it. But, I was listening to it earlier and I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I should give it a second chance. Maybe I should give it that heart on Spotify. Maybe I should realize that this song is good. I would say it's definitely one of the more funkier songs on the album. And now nothing about it is really funky, but I guess it's just the intro. There's some interesting percussive stuff, nothing like Making a Fire's intro with the drums, just kind of like big, just kind of rock drum set, just kind of like, yeah, here we are, we're the Foo Fighters. Yeah, this is our new album. Even though that's not really how Making a Fire sounds. But in contrast to Cloud Spotter's another one where Dave's kind of softer vocals and interesting stuff going on with the musicianship. Just kind of like slides and, bends and all this stuff. And it's a fun track, but again, not one of my favorites. So I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but I still think you should definitely give it a chance because, everybody has different opinions, obviously. So you might think, dude, you're crazy. Cloud Spotter's the best song in the album. And I'd be like, yeah, it's all right. But that's why we're all here. We can disagree. We can have different feelings, and that's all right. And we can all talk about it. And that's what's fun about this. Anyway, so Cloud Spotter, track 3. It looks like, well, it's not the shortest song on the album, but it's shorter than the previous 2. So that, I guess, is interesting if you care about track lengths at all. But then we go to track number 4, which was one of the singles, Waiting on a War, and it's probably one of my favorite. It's got like this acoustic vibe, and if you subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow me on Instagram, that's all the covers I do. They're all acoustic-based songs. So I definitely have a deep kind of respect and admiration for acoustic stuff, and the Foos, they normally do an acoustic kind of flair on their albums. They have, I know with their 2017 release, Concrete and Gold, I was listening to that the other night on vinyl. It kind of starts out with a rock kind of vibe, and then towards the end, there's like 3 or 4 tracks that are kind of lighter, and it's like, yeah, we're the Foo Fighters. We can have fun, too. But, so that's, I don't know, Waiting on a War. The message, Dave kind of talks about growing up outside of D.C., and him being afraid of having, a war going to come, because he grew up in the Cold War era, so that was like a fear of many people. And I believe his daughter said to him back in, January or whatever, not this past January, but this would have been January of 2020, when there was, I suppose, concerns over going to war with Iran, or at some point when they were writing or something, that she was concerned that there was going to be a war. And she asked, are we going to have a war? And, that, I guess that's where Dave drew his inspiration from. That feeling, it kind of reminded him of it. And that's where the title comes from, Waiting on a War. The opening lyric. I've been waiting on a war since I was young. And I think it speaks to the fear and the concern that some people have or had that, what if we get into a war? Because, nobody likes war. War isn't good. It leads to a lot of problems, obviously, but I think that's kind of interesting how there's that generational connection, and, Dave makes a song out of it. And it, like I said, starts out with that kind of acoustic vibe. It's just Dave playing a guitar and singing. And then, like all the songs, it adds on, it builds up, and then the whole band's there, and you're singing along with it, because I've been waiting on a war since I was young. But this isn't the podcast of me singing. Maybe you guys like me singing. I don't know. It helps me think about what the song is and how it goes. But probably one of my favorite songs. I love to sing along with. I like how Dave sounds on the track. He just really just goes for it and just sings it. As I mentioned, I think he's an underrated vocalist, and I think he should get more looks at for his vocal skills, but he's an all-around great guy, so, you can't ask for too much there. So anyway, moving on to the next track, Medicine at Midnight, the title track. This one, I don't know. It's kind of plain sounding. It's not one that I've listened to on repeat quite a lot, but I think it's still a good song. Kind of just easy listening. There's not a whole lot to say about this track. this is kind of how chorus goes, like, there's medicine at midnight. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know what medicine at midnight means. Maybe I should have done a little more research. Maybe I could have found that out. I do know on the Foo Fighters YouTube channel, they have, and on their Spotify, they have a track-by-track kind of commentary. So if you want to hear, 3-4 minutes talk about each of the tracks on the album, just kind of like, this is this and this is that, like, from the people who actually made the songs and the people who were there during the writing process, people much more qualified than I would definitely say, hey, go check that out. But yeah, not much to say about Medicine at Midnight. Sorry if you were dying to hear about the title track, but go listen to it. Go check it out. It is not the shortest song on the album. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. It's 2 seconds longer than the shortest song. Speaking of length, pause. The album length is 36 minutes and 32 seconds. So not that long. It'll just be slightly longer than this podcast. So, I mean, hey, you got an hour, listen to the album, then listen to my thoughts about it. Or, listen to my thoughts, then listen to the album. Whichever way you want to do it. But Medicine at Midnight, yeah. It's an easy listening song. I don't know. No big takeaways from Medicine at Midnight. And sorry if that offends anyone, or if anyone has big opinions or strong opinions on how they feel about Medicine at Midnight. Anywho, moving on to the other single from the album, No Son of Mine. This, now I said, Making a Fire has real rock vibes to it, yeah. But this is the most rock sounding track of all. The opening riff, I remember when they released the single, and you watch it on YouTube. What does everybody do when they watch video on YouTube? They go to the comments. Or they released a clip on Instagram, and I went to the comments, because the comments is where people get their opinions from. And I don't know if you guys can hear my dogs barking in the background, but if you can, someone has just come home from school or work or something, so they think it's an intruder, so they are obviously freaking out. So if you hear that, just ignore it. We're going to roll on with the podcast. The show must go on. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm going to let them run down the hallway here. Again, my apologies if you hear that and it's interrupting this experience we're having together, this discussion that is really just one way. Kind of feel like I'm talking to a wall here, but this engaging discussion we're having about No Son of Mine, it was. But the comments, they made a point that I thought was funny. Those of you who know Rammstein, as some people call them, German heavy metal band, big song, some of you might know, maybe not everybody, but Du Hast. That is the main kind of riff to Du Hast. And it's du. I'm not going to sing it all because I get a little cringe at that. But that riff sounds very similar to No Son of Mine. I'm not accusing anybody of stealing anything. I think that's ridiculous. But I think that's interesting that there were many people in the comment section making that connection, and then I kind of said, and I kind of heard that too, and I was like, yeah, they're right. Like, I hear this, but it's got that kind of riff going on in the background, and then it's Dave's kind of just vocals are kind of like, it's almost like they have a spotlight on him here when he sings the verse, like No Son of Mine, and it's like everything kind of fades out, and then it kind of builds, and then the vocals pick up, and then it's like the whole band comes together, and it's just like a jam session, and I don't know what they're saying, I don't know what's going on, but it's a fun song. And a note that Dave made, he said they were talking about No Son of Mine and their little track commentary, and I was listening to this when they were playing it on the radio, and he said, I can't wait to open shows with this one, and that just was like, yeah, fuck yeah, man, like, ready to hear this one live in person. Like, it would be a great opener to concerts. I can definitely envision exactly what he's talking about there. Just that jump, and something they kind of do is they take someone's vocals. I'm not sure if it's Taylor or Dave's, or they might have had one of their female backup vocalists, and they kind of push it around, so it's like, oh, so it's like bouncing all around, and it's fun. They have fun with it. This track is a lot of fun. It's the most rock of all the tracks, but still fits right in. It's a nice little shift from kind of the more softer, different sounding, maybe slightly poppy songs that the Foo Fighters make here. But yeah, No Son of Mine, probably another one of my favorite tracks off the album. So moving on, we go to track number 7 out of 9, and that is Holding Poison. This was one similar to Cloud Spotter, where at first I was like, yeah, this song's like, meh, it's okay, like, sure. But different from Cloud Spotter, it grew on me, and I've come to like it. And, that's a great thing, I find that happens a lot when you listen to a song and you're like, yeah, that's okay. But then after, a million different, times you listen to it again and you listen to it again and you're like, this is probably one of my more favorite songs. Now, I'm not saying Holding Poison is one of my favorite, but I was just using that as an example to say songs you can start out not liking and then they can grow on you, which is really the case with this whole album. But we'll get to that when we get to my final album reviews. So Holding Poison, I think Dave, he sounds good. Like I said, his vocals sound good throughout the track. And when I say Dave sounds good, I'm not saying, his guitar tone sounds great, or, I really like how he plays this. I'm talking about his voice, because that's really what shines through the most. I think he sounds good. I think he sounds good on this whole album, and I think this is where the band comes together to make a really good track. And I think Dave sounds great, and I think they all just really work together, and it shows why, they've been around. Let's see, their first album came out in 1995, Color and the Shape. Their second album came out in like 97, 98. So let's see, 95 to today. Let's see. That is 26 years ago. So it just proves, they can come together and make these great tracks. And ultimately with this album, they can come together and do something different, which I think also speaks to their longevity. They don't get caught in a rut. They don't get caught doing the same thing, because that can often get boring for artists and burn them out. So we get to the last 2 tracks, which are probably, this next one at least, Chasing Birds. I don't know. I feel like I'm just like floating on a pillow. Like, it's just like really easy vibes throughout this song. Really just kind of like hanging out. You're just free as a bird, just chasing birds. It's in the title. Definitely that acoustic feel shines through, which contributes to the laid back nature of the song. Dave's voice is nice and soft. He's not like in your face or anything like that. Definitely it's a relaxing song, and it doesn't really pick up into like an intense face melting guitar solo, which isn't really even the Foo Fighters brand. Even when it's like the solo break or whatever, it's just kind of like easy going. It's like nothing to like raising your heart rate or anything like that. Nothing to get you moving. Something just to kind of let you take a deep breath. And that's awesome. That's what it's all about. So then we get to the last track number 9, Love Dies Young. And Dave says this is probably his favorite track on the album. And his reasoning was because the track, the way it grew, the way it progressed, kind of how it started and how it finished. He liked the way that transformation occurred. And, I wasn't there in the sessions. I wasn't there in the writing. So I'll just take his word for it that it was a great transformation, this, that, and the other. But I like the way the track sounds, kind of starts out with Dave just Love Dies Young, and there's this little chunking pattern going on in the background, and then the band kind of comes in. There's a nice little like keyboard guitar part going on, like kind of in the background. It's kind of just like real poppy, almost kind of funky vibes. I don't know. Some of you might listen to this and be like, what is this guy talking about? But this is just what comes to my mind. This is how I'm just kind of portraying my thoughts. But it's a great ending to the album. It's a fun song to groove to. And I think it'd be a good song live, And then there's a part kind of in the chorus where it all kind of drops out, and then Dave just hits up with the "Love Dies Young," and then we just get back to the groove, get back to the, shaking the head from side to side, bouncing up and down, having fun. It's light, it's bubbly, it's in there. So that's the album. That's 9 tracks, 36 minutes, 32 seconds. So some reviews on the album. Let me get you what other people have thought, then I'll share my thoughts. So The Guardian, UK publication, 3 out of 5 stars. The Independent, another UK publication, 3 out of 5 stars. Pitchfork gave it a 4.7 out of 10. You know those people at Pitchfork. They're full of crap. I believe Greta Van Fleet, one of my favorite bands, they gave their second album like less than a 1, I believe it was. And we'll be talking about Greta Van Fleet in due time on this podcast, probably when their new album drops in about April. So stay tuned for that if you're a Greta Van Fleet fan. And Rolling Stone gave Medicine at Midnight, the Foo Fighters release, a 4 out of 5 stars. So I don't really do it out of stars, I do it out of 10. So if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, after my first listen to this album, I said, it's about a 6, maybe a 6.5 out of 10. I would have been kind of a little more harsh. But, once you kind of develop, once you give it multiple listens, and once you kind of heard it on the radio, and once your mom buys it on CD, so then it's playing in the house, you're like, it's probably closer to an 8 out of 10 in my book. Maybe a 7.5. But it's definitely a fun album, which is what they were going for. Like I said, party album is what comes to mind. It might not be everyone's favorite, especially if you're more into the heavy metal side. You might be like, this sucks. But I think a lot of people can enjoy it. I think it could bring a lot of, listeners to rock. They can like, oh, I like this. Maybe I'll go explore this. I think it's something that it's kind of middle of the road. Enough people can gravitate towards that, it's a good time had by all. And I think that's kind of the goal of this podcast. Or not this podcast, goodness. This album. I have my mind set on wrapping up the podcast and teasing what is coming next. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Medicine at Midnight. It's a good album. I think it's a fun album. I think a lot of people would enjoy it if you just laid back and just enjoying the music, hanging out with your friends. Anyhow, that is all I've got for episode number 5. I hope you enjoyed listening today, and I hope you tune in next week. We're going to be talking about Master of Puppets, Metallica's epic release in 1986. And I know some of you might be thinking, Kill 'Em All, and now I'm going to Master. I skipped Ride the Lightning. We will get to Ride the Lightning. Nobody said I had to do these albums in order, so we're going to bounce around. We're going to have some fun with it. Master of Puppets. I hope to have my friend Roman join me back for that podcast. Speaking of which, today is the day that I'm recording this. February 22nd is Roman's birthday, so I want to wish Roman a happy birthday today, so it can be recorded and heard by all forever and ever. But I hope you can tune in next week. We're going to talk about Master of Puppets. If you like what you heard here today, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, your coworkers, your boss. Send it to everybody. Let's blow this thing up if you enjoy it. If you have any feedback, if you want me to do a certain album, or if you want me to talk about certain things more, let me know. Message me on Instagram, OwenW409. You can leave me a message in the Anchor app, I believe. You can message me at the podcast, the Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. On Instagram. You can comment on a post. You can get in those DMs. You can hit me up. Let me know. I need this feedback. I need to know that, you guys are enjoying this content. But that's about all I got for you guys today. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. And as always, never stop rocking.